And welcome, everyone, to another episode of Virtual for You, Wine Tasting and Discussion. I'm based here at my stay-at-home winery, which is Jezreel Valley Winery, and here with Adam Montefiore. Very lucky to have gotten him to agree to come on the show. I'm just going to take a second to share this around so people will know that we're live. Hold on. This always happens to me. I end up hearing myself. Just share this around so people know we're live, and then I'll focus on what we should be focused on. So I'm just going to do that. I got to come up with a tech hack that will do this for me, and then I won't have to be doing this. But even though you kind of tell people it's going to be happening, until they see it live, they're like, "Oh yeah, didn't know it was happening." So there we go. That's enough groups to share it in. Whatever happens, happens. So anyway, we're starting to have a live audience. So I see people have started to join. And Adam, just so you know, most of the action takes place in the replays, in the reruns, as we used to call them in the States long ago. There are live people who are joining us, and they are free to ask us questions in the comments, and we will address those questions. I urge you, if you have questions, to come on. Anyway, first of all, I want to set the stage in terms of Jacob Ner-David asks, "What are we drinking?" He gets right to the point. So I'm going to be drinking two different wines, because I'm kind of segueing into my evening. I've been sitting here in the winery all day in meetings. But before I get to what I'll be drinking, Adam, what are you going to be drinking?
I'm going to be drinking a Dalton wine called Levantina. It's a new series called Asufa, which I think translates to collection. And this is the kind of Mediterranean blend using varieties that have some sort of history in Israel that I think will be interesting. And it's a new series, nice price, good quality, and we're talking about wines which will show the future identity of Israel. And I think this is the type of wine that we'll be doing.
I agree completely. A big fan of Dalton. I always was. I still am. So Josh London says excellent choice. Okay, so you got a thumbs up from Josh London.
Hi, Josh.
And welcome to the show, Josh. Yossi Harwich just joined us. So a lot of good names.
Yossi. Yeah.
So I will be drinking two wines because I'm segueing from my daytime wine that I was drinking earlier. So a low alcohol wine. Some people are familiar with this already, which is our Petnat Rosé, which is made from Cardiff. And I'll talk about it a little bit for people who missed prior shows. And then as we get further along and we get more serious, because Adam's a serious guy, even though he can also joke around. I'll be going into Adumim, which is more of a serious wine. But before we do that, so I had a very short history professionally in the wine world. I've been a wine drinker for a long time, but my professional history starts in 2012. But Adam's professional history in the wine world goes a bit further back. And he came to visit Jezreel, which might have been the first time that we officially hung out together in person, even though we had kind of crossed paths at lots of wine events. But came with a group of people to the winery, to Jezreel. Tell us about that group of people and what's so special about them and who they are.
We have a group of people called the Golan Veterans, which was basically the management of the Golan Heights Winery in the late 80s, early 90s, where we go on tours. We still hang out together, Segev and Doron and Karmit and Dorit and me. And every few months we visit a winery or a few wineries, have a meal together, and have a ball. So it's a kind of staying together, because it was a very special place in the 90s, the Golan Heights Winery, for Israeli wine.
Exactly. So for those people who don't know the history, before the Golan Heights Winery was established, good quality wine at scale was non-existent in Israel for the most part. Not to disparage people who were making wine before that, but they were making a type of wine and for a purpose which was kind of different than what we would talk about today. We don't have to get too much into that. And I know for me, as a wine drinker, I very much was affected by Golan Heights Winery in terms of educating myself in wine, particularly wine from Israel. And then as I began to spend more and more of my time here, certainly obviously was important to me. So thank you for everything you did back then. Both as the export manager, but also here in Israel. And the kind of theme for today, besides talking about the wines and where we see the Israeli wine identity, I also want to kind of take you back, but also want to push you forward in the sense of today, according to the numbers that I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Israeli export industry, wine industry, is approximately $50 million a year in sales.
Correct.
Correct? Whereas New Zealand, for example, with a smaller population than Israel, is over $1 billion a year US in export sales. So my question, kind of the overarching theme is, how do we get to $1 billion? And, back then, when you guys were the team at Golan Heights Winery, were you thinking most of your sales would be outside of Israel? Did you have any sense back then how big the Israeli wine industry could get? And then kind of flash forward to today.
Funny enough, I remember a vineyard meeting, a vineyard party during the harvest at the Golan Heights Winery. And someone came up to me and said, in Israel, one day we'll have 60 wineries. And I said to him, showing how ignorant I was, 60 wineries, what does he know? He's come up with this strange idea, 60 wineries. There won't be 60 wineries. At that time, there were about 10 wineries in Israel.
Right.
But now we have so many wineries, they're too many to call. I mean, we say 300, and then there's all the garagist and domestic wineries, and wineries that make wines in other wineries. So there is a large amount of wineries in Israel. We did learn a lot from the Golan Heights Winery. We learned how to market. We learned the importance of tourism. We learned the importance of labels. In the Golan Heights Winery in the 90s, I used to say that they took as much trouble doing the business cards as most wineries did doing the labels. And they understood about wine education, culinary association with wine, quite apart from marketing wine, pricing up the wine, marketing it, selling on scarcity when a wine was scarce. So we learned a lot from the Golan Heights Winery, rather similar to the world learned from Robert Mondavi. And we also learned that to sell a brand, you need export. It's no good getting third-party recognition in Israel. The great brands of Israel, like Castel, like Yarden, like Yatir, Flam, they're usually built on success abroad as opposed to success in Israel. Right. So for branding, export is very important. And the other reason export is very important is for as another pipe for selling, to help sell wine. Israel's pretty saturated with wine. And for those wineries that are up to here with stock, success in export helps reduce the pressure. So export, is very important even then. But when I started, there were 2 wineries in America, and now there's 70. 2 wineries. When I started, there were 2 wineries in America. And now there's 70. Right. So things have changed, and Israel is 55% of our sales go to America. So America export is very, very important. Right. I think it will become more important to Israeli wineries as we develop the brand.
But when you were first starting to export from the Golan Heights Winery, did you say to yourselves, we could be selling? Did you have any limit to your dreams back then?
Listen, I was export manager of the Golan Heights Winery, and then I moved to be export manager of Carmel Winery. And at that stage, those two wineries had 90% of the Israeli exports. So at that stage, I had contacts with 90% of the Israeli exports. Now, of course, totally different. But it just shows how far we've come.
Sure.
In the year 2000, the exports, I think, was $8 million.
Okay.
It's now 50. But Israel has never been an export dominated, and we never thought in terms of Israel. I mean, it was everyone for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we at the Golan Heights Winery knew export was very important because of branding, and Golan Heights Winery got its name from abroad. And when I joined Carmel, it was a brand without good image, and we understood how important export or success abroad was to raising the image. So now we're in a different place entirely. People are talking more about the brand Israel, which is more important than any brand of any winery. Right. So, people used to talk about Australian wine, Chilean wine.
Exactly.
So I'm going to take the brand that we need to sell is Israel, Israeli wine.
Exactly. So I'm going to take you in that direction in a moment. I'll just, kind of plugs for the wines that we're drinking, which is the good segue, which is what's an Israeli identity. In other words, when people say the wines of Israel, what are we hoping that will mean, if it will mean anything to them? By the way, just because you can't see the comments, a couple more comments came in. One from Marcus Israelus. He says, hello, Adam, Ian Schnall, Delta, Setas Mashkiach. Yeah. And then he also asks, how will BDS affect exports? So we will address that at some point. But we'll come back to it. But hopefully it won't affect at all, or it'll have only a positive effect. But we'll come back to it. Yeah. What I want to ask you exactly just what you just said now, but based on your both experience, but also what you're seeing now, and all your work as an author and a speaker. When you say Israeli wine today, what are you hoping people will think?
One of the campaigns of my life is to put Israel as part of the Eastern Mediterranean. I always say kosher is not a country, and Israel's not an island. We're part of a region, and our region is the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, the Eastern Mediterranean gave wine culture to the world. 2,000 years ago, the Eastern Mediterranean was the France of Italy in ancient times in terms of volume and quality.
Right.
In the last 20 years, the Eastern Mediterranean's come alive in all the countries, including Greece, including Lebanon and Israel. And as far as I'm concerned, it's very important that Israel has its region and it's part of a place. It's not part of kosher, it's part of a place. And that place is our region. We should be in this region on the shelves, in the supermarkets, and on the wine list. And how I got to this, once I was a wine buyer for a hotel group. And in the 80s, I was one of the first to work in England with Yarden. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to put Yarden on the wine list. It was a non-Jewish, non-Israeli company, very big hotel company. And I realized I could only put Israel on the list by putting it with Chateau Moussard and calling the area Eastern Mediterranean. Yep. I understood then that Israel is very small and insignificant on its own, and it needed some player to give it a bit more weight. When I came to Israel in '89, I remember in about 1994 or something like that, I wanted to invite a very famous wine journalist to come to Israel. And he wasn't prepared to. He said, it's not enough story for me to come to Israel. So I then arranged for him to go to Lebanon and Israel. And he wrote a story about the Golan Heights Winery and Chateau Moussard. One a laissez-faire winery, one a very technologically advanced winery. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't travel direct between the two countries. He had to go via Cyprus.
Right.
But from this visit, he had lots of articles. And suddenly I realized that our strength and interest in the outside world is being part of a region. So for all my career, I've tried to push Eastern Mediterranean in books that by famous journalists that I give them information on Israel. We put the information under Eastern Mediterranean. And this is a brand which Israel lies within. So first, we should market ourselves as being part of the Eastern Mediterranean. We should market ourselves as being Israeli, Mediterranean, not kosher and Jewish.
Okay.
We should market kosher as something positive, something that's not. I was recently talking to Martin Sinkoff, who you might know, big name in American wine, who we're privileged to have in Israel. And he, Nafala Simon, as they say in Hebrew, I suddenly realized he turned on the light for me. We should be marketing kosher like people market sustainability and organic as something positive, not as something religious and Jewish, something positive. But it's also part of identity. We shouldn't run away from it. We shouldn't pretend it doesn't exist. But we should market the sales pitch in our favor.
Right. Well, there's the spin. There's two, as you know much better than I do. There's two aspects to kashrut in wine. One is totally positive, that you want to know what's in your wine. So, I used to have a math teacher who was, when I was in yeshiva as a kid, who was a very devout Catholic, but he only would buy kosher meat because of that stamp of approval that you kind of knew, you knew something about this meat if it said kosher meat. So he only bought kosher meat. And I think in that way, yeah, we could spin, the kosher thing. All of our wines also say vegan on them. As you know, most, not all, but most wineries in Israel are vegan. They just don't realize they are. And they could put vegan on it. I know Tishby puts vegan on the bottle.
Yeah, more and more are doing it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But kosher was always a positive word as far as food is concerned, but not with wine. In food, it's always been considered very positive to be kosher, but not in wine. And we have to work to change that. And there've been a few revolutions in Israeli wine, starting from 1976 when the Carmel Special Reserve was the first wine aged in small oak barrels. This was a big change as far as quality was concerned. Then the Golan Heights Winery was formed. And this was the first time that the decisions, what happened in the vineyard, when to prune, how to harvest, when to harvest, how to prune, from the grower, the winemaker. This was another big thing. Then Tishby was formed, which was the first grower that decided, I'm going to make my own wine and put my name on the label, which started really the boutique boom. Then we had regions developing. First was the Golan Heights Winery, the Judean Hills with Castell, and the whole boutique boom of the 90s. And now we're in search of identity, which means scratching the surface of a vineyard, finding the different parts of the vineyard which produce better wine, keeping them separate from the others. And we're also exploring, we're always exploring varieties in Israel. We've got far too many varieties. But, one of the interesting trends at the moment is the move back to Mediterranean varieties, which is where they began, 130 years ago. And also creating more blends. So less varietals, more blends.
Exactly.
This is helping us try and find an identity. And maybe in another 50 to 100 years, we'll have an identity.
We need it much sooner. We need it much sooner, Adam.
Wow.
Going on the varietals issue, it's a sensitive question, and I'll open up this to everyone in the audience, but both to you. And wineries are commercial operations at the end of the day, and you go out there with a blend that's Syrah, Carignan. In our case, this blend, for example, is Syrah, Carignan, and Argaman. And so you're dealing with Syrah and Carignan in the kind of core audience of Israeli wines currently are not certainly Carignan are not as well known, even though kind of the trivia, which you know, is that Carignan is probably the most planted varietal here. Syrah, obviously, from a global point of view, very important, but for whatever reason, specifically within the Israeli wine scene, was not as core. And then Argaman, obviously, kind of nobody's heard of it. So, we are push this forward because we believe in an identity for our own winery, but I also would like to believe that it's part of building the Israeli wine identity, not only from these three varietals, but from others, which I think are more kind of go with the Eastern Mediterranean concept. So I want to challenge you on that. In other words, the classic Bordeaux blends, the classic Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot, how do you see those falling into that Eastern Mediterranean category, if you will?
Well, no doubt, the best wines, probably the best wines we make, tend to be the classic Bordeaux blend based on Cabernet Sauvignon. But some of the most interesting wines we make are made from Mediterranean varieties, or even a combination of Mediterranean and Bordeaux. You look at Sora vineyards; they have the Cabernet Syrah. Lachat also has this blend. The wonderful thing about Israelis, they're great experimenters, and which means one of the reasons we've moved so fast is because Israelis, as soon as something's new, they all want the same thing. I mean, I'm now a wine writer, as you probably know, for the Jerusalem Post. This year, I'm suddenly receiving rosés for Shavuot from all the wineries. It's as though, 50 shades of pink. Everything is rosé. Every winery is suddenly launching rosé. We tend to have these waves of trends in Israel. And there's certainly a trend now towards blended wines instead of varietals, to trying to find a wine based on terroir. If it's a varietal, it's based on the fruit and character of the grape variety. If it's a blend or from a single vineyard, you're trying to find some sort of message in the bottle from the taste of the wine. And this wine also that I'm drinking now is a blend of Petit Syrah, Carignan, and Grenache. Carignan is, just one correction, Carignan is not the biggest planted variety in Israel today. It's Cabernet Sauvignon, believe it or not. For 100 years, Carignan was the biggest variety, and in the 70s, over 50% of our grapes were Carignan.
Okay, so I was correct at one point in history.
Yeah.
So you say what you're saying is fascinating, right? Because you're saying there is a place for cab, right? You don't have to be cab free, right? You don't have to be like gluten free. You don't have to be cab free. You can use the classic Cabernet Sauvignon. You can use the classic kind of Bordeaux blends, but make them your own, or even better, mix them up. In other words, take a Cabernet Sauvignon, mix it with Carignan and Syrah, and see what happens. Like the wine that you're just talking about right now, in terms of that Dalton wine, which I've not had yet, I need to have it. When you look at the marketability of that, right? Do you see people say Dalton, which obviously they respect, and then they see a name and it's going to be a blend? Do you think most of the consumers of that wine will actually look to see, what are the varietals that are in the wine?
Can I digress a second and remind us all that the wine industry is based on a minimum of 4 different markets which have no contact whatsoever in each other. One of the largest markets is the bulk wine market.
Yeah.
Bulk wine is crossing the oceans in large container bladders. Right. We got no idea how big this market is, but there's a lot of wine that's been bottled in various countries from the bulk wine market. Yeah. Then we've got the economy market. Let's say the economy market, the commodity market.
Right.
And the economy market. Let's say it's under $10 a bottle or $12 a bottle. And these are wines that people don't read the back label. They buy on a brand that they know. They buy the price. They buy a nice label. They buy like a commodity. And the following of the public in the big brand, even if it's big brands, international brands, is far smaller in the wine industry than it is in the spirits industry or the beer industry. So It's a very diverse industry, wine, and the brands in the commodity market have far less pull than the wineries and we all would like to think. But this is a market that operates totally separately from the bulk wine market, and the next market, which let's say is more than $12 a bottle,
Right.
what I call it's more wine is more a quality object, more art involved. The person who buys it wants to know the region it's made. He wants to read the story about the winemaker. He's more interested in the varieties, and this extends, all the way to quite expensive wines. And the final sector is the fine wine market, the Lafittes and the Margots, where people speculate, which is a totally different industry.
Right.
Now, all the Israel market, virtually, I'm generalizing, is in this third market. We're not in the commodity market. I mean, in Israel we are, but not abroad. We're not in the bulk wine market. We don't have enough wine.
Right.
And we're certainly not in the other market. So all our market is the type of person that will read the back label, is interested in what he buys. And certainly the wino, the guy who's interested, the people who are watching this program, will be interested in tasting Argaman from Jezreel Valley because it's something new and exotic. But more in the commodity market, they won't be interested. They want Cabernet, it's a brand. They want Merlot, it's a brand. Like Yarden is a brand, like Carmel is a brand. So we have to operate, in Israel, we have to understand where we are. We have to understand what our market is. Now, we produce, I think we're about number 35 in the number of, in the order of wine producing countries.
Right.
35.
Yeah, I've seen that.
If I have to count to 35 countries that make wine, I get to about 20 and then I struggle. So 35 is pretty low down. A few years ago, even little Cyprus produced more wine than Israel. The boutique winery of Gallo Sonoma, produces more wine than the whole of Israel. There's one particular vineyard in Monterey Valley which produces more wine in the whole of Israel. So we will never have the volume to get into the supermarkets and build a brand like the Australians did and Chileans did. When I'm old enough to remember the first Master of Wine visit to these countries, the first time the wines trickled into England, which was always the place trend started, and then they took over the world, Australian and Chilean wine. Israel can never manage to do that.
Why not?
We don't have the volume, and we don't have the price. We don't have the volume that we can go in to do long-term contracts with supermarkets and generalizing, and we don't have the low prices. Now,
right. So why not? Because people ask that question all the time. In other words,
we don't have a volume. If you do a deal with Tesco's or Walmart's or Trader Joe's, you've got to provide large volumes, and they want low prices. These are very competitive price markets. The English market, which I know better than any, is the cheapest market in Europe, apart from Holland, probably. And Israel, they're bemused abroad how expensive Israeli wines are.
So how? But explain to me and to everyone else, how did New Zealand do it, right? How did they get to the volumes? How did New Zealand wasn't making these volumes of wine 75 years ago. So how did they get to those volumes of wine to be able to have New Zealand wine be a category in a British supermarket?
It's very interesting. New Zealand is a very good model to follow. They had one very famous wine called Cloudy Bay, which broke the barriers and created a lot of interest. A famous variety, Sauvignon Blanc. Rather like in Israel, we had a great brand to start with that was Yarden. And I suppose the Yarden Cabernet Sauvignon was the brand that first led quality Israeli wine. And we have a lot to learn from New Zealand because New Zealand wine, out of the major wine producers, is the highest average priced wine on the shelves.
Exactly. That's why
maintain that. Now, the fact that we're stuck where we are in terms of price is actually a good thing, because it means that we're not going to commit the two great mistakes that Australia and Chile did. Again, this comes from my meeting with discussion with Martin Sinkoff. I want to give credit where credit's due.
Sure.
Chile set itself out as good value wine, and this is what they sold. And now, when they're trying to upgrade, it's very difficult to leave this slogan behind. And Australia went into a massive campaign for exports, cutting prices, and it nearly destroyed the brand. In Israel, we can't do that. We have to know where we are and who we are. And it's clear to me that with our price range, our target market is quality restaurants and fine wine shops. Supermarkets, apart from the really big wineries, Barkan, Carmel, Tepperberg, we're not going to be there. So we have to sell the brand in terms of quality, added value through the story. And we can learn a lot from New Zealand. If you go on, look at the New Zealand websites, look at how they brand the country, look at them at a wine exhibition where all the stands look the same. Everything is marketed under the black folders and the Kiwi brand. They know how to market a country. In Israel, we've never realized until now that Israel is the brand.
Exactly.
We've all thought our own brand is important. Israel is the brand. And that's why, I tried to sell this. I formed Handcrafted Wines of Israel in 2003, which had some pretty good wineries as part of it. When you're looking at wineries today, this lasted about 2.5 years maximum. And it was very good for image, but not so good for sales, and it fell away in the end. But it was a gesture or a cry out that we have to sell brand Israel and talk about brand Israel like they talked about brand Australia for years. So I think New Zealand is a very good one to follow and work at. But they're slightly bigger than we are. I think we have a lot to learn today from Greece, which 20 years ago was very similar to Israel. And the story of what's happened in Greece is very similar, except they have better indigenous varieties. But they were also controlled by 4 monopolies, like Israel had 1 monopoly. And then there was this kind of revolution. And the story of Greece is very similar to our story. In other words, we're both part of the ancient world, as opposed to the new world and old world. And another country we can learn from is Georgia, which is... we create a lot of interest because through being exotic. And I believe for a lot of people, Israel is exotic. It's amazing. I remember once I ate in a restaurant in Boston, and a sommelier came up to me with his papillon, like a real sommelier, and tastavan, like an old-fashioned French sommelier. And I said, do you have any Israeli wines? And he said, what do you mean, Herzog or Manischewitz? And this was in modern times. So it brought home to me that whereas we think everyone reads the Bible and knows that winemaking in Israel is part of their, we've been making wine for 2,000 years before the vine reached France and Italy, but most people don't know that. Most people think we're a land of camels and people sleep outside and there are tanks in the street. They don't understand that Israel is an old wine-producing country, an old new wine-producing country. So we have a lot of work to do.
I think I would actually put a little bit of emphasis onto that, and then I'm going to challenge you, and then a bit more, put you on the spot a bit more, and then go to some of the questions that people ask. But to put the emphasis a bit more on what you said, I often had the experience of talking to people, particularly in the square states in America, in the middle of the country, that don't realize that Israel is a real place, right? You could be on the phone with someone. And you could say, I used to live right off of Bethlehem Street in Jerusalem, and I would say, I'm on Bethlehem Street, but it's the street. Bethlehem is a couple kilometers away, and I would say, what are you talking about? Bethlehem's not a real place, and I would say, no, it is a real place. So,
and also the opposite is true. You go to a taxi driver in London, and they think Israel's 300 million people because they're so upfront and so loud and noisy. So, but we've got a lot of work to do. The brand in Israel, and it doesn't matter whether you're selling kosher or non-kosher. The marketing is as though it's for the non-kosher market.
Right.
You have to understand that the sommeliers, the wine buyers, are interested in Argaman. So thank you to Jezreel Valley for focusing on Argaman and Carignan and things which are a bit different. the commodity or cheaper market want Cabernet and Merlot. We have to also make money and sell.
Right.
We're getting to a stage, we're a country without any borders. We're a country without an agreed wine region map. We have an absurd situation. I mean, so
we have microclimates, but yeah.
We're getting our act together slowly. The winemakers have come up with a map recently.
Yeah.
But the official map of the country still talks about Samson and Shomron. So we're light years behind being a sharp, marketing-orientated wine industry. And most of the developments are winery-led. But there are some encouraging signs. The Export Institute is now marketing a Wines of Israel campaign. And marking a campaign amongst Israeli wineries is a nightmare. I mean, I learned very quickly that the only time Israelis don't argue is during a war. Otherwise, everyone's the egos and so the fact is that there are new things being done. Thanks to the Export Institute, they got a lot of money for wineries to sell brand Israel.
Right.
And people like me, and there's many people like me, we've been selling brand Israel all our lives, and we've got to keep on. And as I said, and I repeat, the marketing is the same, whether it's in the kosher market or non-kosher market.
Sure.
So we talk the talk as though we're in the non-kosher market. Israel's part of the Eastern Mediterranean. It's a new world, technology advanced wine country in one of the oldest growing regions on earth. And we've got to tell our story and keep this onward pursuit of excellence to improve the wines and make them more interesting. And funnily enough, in the outside world, outside the kosher bubble, this is happening. People are interested in talking about Israel. The Golan Heights Winery with their Land of Israel campaign about the Golan Heights and the Judean Hills Quartet for the Judean Hills have done a lot to advance regions. So maybe in the future, we'll be hearing more about regional differences in wine, regions and vineyards, than we will about varieties. And it's a good beginning.
My counter to that, just in terms of the Israeli wine scene, is that, as you know, there are a lot of wineries who have vineyards in all different microclimates of Israel. So I don't know that wineries themselves will have identities, but certainly the varietals have an identity. So the thing that I'll put you on the spot on is, let's say 10 years from now, right? Will total exports be double, triple? How quickly do you think we can grow the market?
Well, I was the guy that thought we wouldn't get to 60 wineries a few years ago, so I'm not the best person to ask. We have a problem in Israel, is that we sell too much wine in Israel. So the whole of Israel is geared to selling wines in Israel. I am appalled, simply appalled, as an English speaker who's a wine professional, at the standard of marketing of some of our biggest and best wineries in English, on internet sites, on tasting notes, on tasting notes and even labels.
Right.
So we're pretty illiterate as far as export needs. I mean, this is one of the things I do now. I'm a consultant, and I try and help people gear up to learning how to get the export written material as it should be. And it's amazing that some wineries that are enormously successful don't mind producing material where there's spelling mistakes, where it's obviously translated by Google Translate, and it drives any English speaker crazy because it shows that there's not enough attention to the market. Now, we sell, I believe, 15% of our wine is exported only. It can be as little as 10. At the maximum, it was 20. Now, you've got other countries like New Zealand and Chile, where they're based on export. I mean, they have to export to survive. And you see it in the whole marketing of the countries. Israel, we don't sell enough abroad.
So I'm saying, do you think we'll succeed in flipping it?
Listen, there are two places where there's a lot of potential. One of the potentials your biggest market is always the one with the most potential. I mean, Israel, it's really true that we sell 5 liters per head, not including grape juice. And there's a lot of potential in Israel. So if there was some marketing or education, selling wine, competing with beer and other alcoholic beverages as something Israeli. So I mean, the big failure of the Israeli wine industry is we haven't grown the market in Israel. We all are drinking better. We're all paying more for wine. We're all talking more the language, but it's a conversation between a small percentage of winos. It's not reaching out. So this is still a market of the biggest potential. The next market of the biggest potential, in my opinion, is America. Now, a lot of people say, no, it's the Far East and it's Europe. No, in America, there's an enormous amount of fat in kosher and without kosher, outside kosher. And it's an enormous market. And Israel is turning a corner where it could be, it will never be like New Zealand, but it could get plow its own furrow as a wine country that creates interest, and it's sought after by people, and it's talked about people, and we're nearly there. So we have a kind of, we have a paradox where outside the kosher market, people are suddenly getting interested in Israeli wine. Within the kosher market, there's a lot of beefing among the experts within the kosher market. Israeli wine is boring, and it's, the wines that come into the States are older because of it's always a vintage wine.
This is not boring, I can tell you that.
Nor is this. There is an enormous breakthrough in the last few years in terms of knowledge of the third-party critics and journalists who are crucial to advancing brand Israel. So that's very exciting. And I can't say we've arrived. I can't say in 20 years' time we'll be the new France. Okay, that's obviously absurd. We have to know where we are in Israel. When you go to Vinexpo or Provine and you see that Brazil and Uruguay has a bigger stand than Israel, you understand how small and how insignificant Israel is in the world of wine. And thank God we have kosher, because it's like an extension of the domestic market. And all, Italian wineries don't benefit from Italian restaurants. So expatriate Italians. So thank God we have kosher, because if not, we'd be in a far bigger problem. So I hope,
or we would have gotten our
your question without a figure. I hope that we're turning a corner, that we'll understand who we are, which market we've got to be in, not try and be what we aren't, and we'll have a more concentrated focus on the markets that I mentioned, the on-premise or on-trade markets, as being part of the Eastern Mediterranean, in liquor stores being part of the Eastern Mediterranean, and that we can market Israel as the most advanced, best quality wine region within the Eastern Mediterranean, which in fact I believe to be true. So I believe that once export becomes more important to the wineries, they will work together more, selling brand Israel. We see the beginnings of it now, but it's, there's a long way to go. And I believe when wineries learn that they need exports because they're producing too much for here, when something is necessary, you have to do it. For instance, up to 2 months ago, a lot of wineries didn't know what selling online was. Now all the wineries have suddenly become experts selling online. So people react when they have to. And if they still find it too easy to sell wine in Israel at the existing prices, why export and get a lower price? So that's the crux of the matter. But I've been involved with Israeli wine since the 1980s, and what's happened until now is a kind of miracle. Say it's over 35 years ago, that's a kind of miracle. What will be in the next 35 years, I don't know. We're not going to be France or Italy, but we're certainly going to be in a different place than we are now. And it shouldn't be a cliche, but we're on a journey is very exciting, and we're going onwards and upwards. And the fact we're having these sort of conversations and we're drinking good wine is very important. Yeah. And we have to concentrate on selling brand Israel, scratching the map of Israel to find interest within the terroir, within vineyard sites, and telling our story to a public that is fascinated in new regions, new grape varieties. So that's where we're going. Whether we're going to sell $1 billion in sales, I'm certain not, but we'll have a lot of fun on the way.
We'll have the same conversation in 10 years from now. I can tell you, two things from my own experience, and then I'll address Josh's question, and then the other question that had come up earlier, and then we have to wind it up. We could obviously talk for a very long time about all these subjects, but and I do, especially after a few glasses of wine. But when we started Jezreel, because I was coming from the high-tech world, where we basically said in high-tech startups in Israel, there's very little local market. So right out of the gate, we're looking at the world as our market, and Israel as either there's no market in Israel for many high-tech companies, or it's a very small market. And then I got into the wine world, and it's exactly as you said. I found all these wonderful wineries who I was a consumer of, who were selling 80-90% of their production in Israel, and I just couldn't believe it. I never really paid attention to the numbers before. In our own business plan, and I'll now expose something kind of on air to everyone, but in our own business plan for Jezreel, from day zero, I wrote that 70% of our sales, meaning my dream from the business plan, that 70% of our sales would be outside of Israel. And we showed this to some people, and they said, absolutely no way. I'm proud to say that we are hovering around that number. And exactly as you said, 70% of the 70% is in the United States. But most of our sales are outside of Israel. That doesn't mean that the local market is not important. I think that's the kind of the interesting situation, which has also happened in high tech, which is that Israel has become a market, and you can now try things out in the local market in high tech, and you can try things out in the local market in wine. And I think the wine buying public has become, exactly as you said, has become more educated. So thanks to you and to your colleagues.
To everyone, yeah, there's a lot of...
Yeah, to everyone. So I think it's, I think we're set up for the next 35 years. Josh asks a question, which I'll give my answer, but I also want you to give your answer, which is with the situation in the world right now, with the loss of restaurants, catering halls, so on and so forth, do we expect a Israeli wine market contraction, either domestically or from an export point of view? What do we see happening? So I can tell you, as from my own personal experience as a winery, we had huge question marks 2 months ago as to what would happen. What we saw is, thank God, and I have to thank all the people out there who, they didn't go to restaurants, but they still wanted to drink wine. So they found ways to order wine and to continue buying wine. Yes, the wineries need to do something for that wine to be available. Here in Israel, we did a lot to make our wine accessible. And in the States, we had some great partners doing the same thing. Both a lot of the traditional stores doing curbside delivery and so on, but also some of the e-tailers like Kosher Wine and so on. So I'm, from a Jezreel point of view, because we were not a player at the kind of catering hall type bulk purchasing, we so far, thank God, are okay. I think the much larger wineries who, and you could speak much more to that market, I haven't spoken to them, but I'm assuming they must be feeling it or will feel it more than the smaller wineries.
I think the larger wineries are in clover. I mean, the larger wineries in Israel, and I think it's pretty similar in other countries. The supermarkets have been selling up on sales. The larger wineries have the brands. I mean, as far as supermarkets in Israel, talking 6, 7 wineries. So I imagine they're up in sales. People are buying more online from supermarkets. The big brands, the small wineries with big names, I think they've been managed to sell wine. I think the smaller wineries have a problem. I think a smaller winery that hand sells his wines at the cellar door or at a restaurant
very small
is going to struggle, and there's going to be some casualties, I should think. But overall, people are drinking wine, and people are drinking wine at home, which is a fantastic thing. Naturally, as though it's part of the day-to-day routine, and I think this is a great benefit out of it. By the way, I'm sure that there'll be a baby boom in 9 months' time after it's shut down, and I'm sure there'll be a raise in the number of divorces in a few months' time, which will make the lawyers richer. But certain people are drinking more wine, and that's good. But there is a big danger in this situation for the smaller brands.
Right. So somebody had asked a question earlier, which I didn't want to completely ignore, about BDS. I personally have not found that to be a factor at all. The reverse. I've actually seen kind of brand Israel as a positive thing. I haven't encountered any. Again, personally, haven't encountered any situation where somebody has not bought wine because it's from Israel. I've only experienced the reverse.
I don't think BDS has had any contact, any effect at all.
No effect.
Probably has the opposite effect, because as soon as a winery is published as being a target, because it's part of what I call the Central Mountain area in Israel.
Right.
I don't call it West Bank, because then I'm a leftist, and I don't call it Yehuda v'Shomron because then I'm a rightist. So I have my own name for it, which is Central Mountains. If you're from the Central Mountains and you're targeted, what happens is the actually sales go up.
Exactly.
The people trying to make it up. So I don't think BDS has had an effect at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're ending on. I don't want to end on a BDS note. So I didn't want to ignore the question though. So I wanted to thank Adam for spending the time with us. I completely agree that I think we have started to turn the corner as the Israeli wine industry. I'm proud to be a part of it, and these days kind of walk hand in hand with Adam and his colleagues. But obviously they paved a lot of the way for us. So I thank you. Made it easier for those of us who are getting into it more recently. I am a optimistic person, and I come from as I said, a startup background where, if VCs don't hear billions of dollars, they turn off, right? It's like, oh, if you're not dreaming big enough. So let me have my dreams. I'll dream of the billions of dollars.
How do you make a large fortune in the wine industry? Start with a small fortune.
Yeah,
you know that already.
I know it well, but
very quickly, it's very important for our industry that people like you have chosen to be in it. You bring a new view. Certainly, your Vinsent program or Dreams campaign is something very worthwhile looking into, and the winery is exactly the sort of winery that creates interest through the quality, through the great varieties, and it's wonderful to have Jezreel Valley adorning the map of Israel wine country. So, thank you, Brooke. Congratulations to you for being part of it all.
L'chaim, cheers, virtual cheers. Clink your screens, everyone. And tune in next week. We'll be going again live next week. And hopefully we'll have Adam again on in the future. Be well. Have a good night, everyone. And drink safely and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Good night.